My name is Jasmine Conway, and I am a survivor of sex trafficking. I am a professional advocate. That is what I do, but it is also who I am. I have a degree in international business with a support in global studies, and I'm currently pursuing a graduate certificate in nonprofit management. That happened after I exited the life or ceased to be trafficked. When I returned home from being trafficked, I was like, let me try this again. But I knew that, like, in order for me to regain like a sense of socioeconomic stability that wasn't relying on somebody else to take care of me and didn't require me to like trade sex for money, that I was gonna have to like go out and get a trade or a degree or something. You know, people have called upon me to just share different insights about my own experience being trafficked. People wanted to know more, seeing how like I could shed light to people, but then also knowing my own circumstances and how hard it was for me to overcome some of my barriers. I was like, I got it in my mind, like, you know, I want to help other people in the same way. The world is starting to recognize that like this experience, there's something not all the way voluntary about this. They believe themselves to have made the decision to like be exploited. For example, with me, when I first got out of the life, I didn't really fully understand that I had been victimized. I didn't really understand the role of the trafficker, the role of the recruiter, and all of those things. And so for a while, all I felt was a lot of confusion, a lot of shame, a lot of like resentment and anger, and like all of these very toxic negative emotions. My mom actually was the first person to like tell me, oh, well, you know, they're doing a human trafficking presentation. We should go together and like check it out. So I'm sitting at this presentation with my mom, and there's an advocate, but this person was more of a systems advocate, not a one-to-one advocate, but they were like teaching, and they were talking about a lot of the things that traffickers do to victims. And I'm telling my mom like, oh, that happened to me. Oh, that happened to me. Oh, that happened to me, but not exactly like that. And then I'm like, oh, well, they kind of have this right, but that's not exactly right. At that point, like, she had told me later on, she was like, you know, it's crazy because like, you a lot of the stuff that you're saying like happened to you aligns so much with the way that they're defining like somebody being trafficked. And I think up until that point, my mom even didn't really fully understand like exactly what had happened to me. About the grooming, right. It's easy to miss because the way that trafficking occurs typically is not the way that is consistent with what we are taught by like media, and you know that whole narrative of like, oh yeah, kidnapped or like shackled. And that's not to say that that doesn't happen to some people, because certainly that's a part of some people's experience, but it's not a part of a lot of people who have been trafficked experience. And a lot of times the shackling is done in the mind more so than anything, and that can be just as effective as a physical bondage. I think it's very important for people to recognize that you should always be viewing your relationship from a scope of, is this healthy? Typically, at least, you know, in some of the cases that like I've interacted with now, there'll be a man meets a woman, or a woman meets a woman, and there's this quick, like kind of rapid succession of moving from, oh, hey, we met, we are making friends, we like one another, to, hey, now come and meet this guy that like, you know, is the guy, my guy, our guy. Or the man saying, oh yeah, you got to come and meet my family. That kind of like language, and it's a very rapid thing. that is a pretty solid indicator that, oh, there are probably some things that might be going on. But overall, just that understanding of healthy boundaries in relationships. Early on, even before we come into contact with the oppression and the exploitation that trafficking is, we already come into contact with a lot of these other kinds of oppressions. You know, I'm gonna just say it plain. I think the reality that we live in, especially like we minorities, people of color, are contending with like a lot of socioeconomic disparities. We know from studies, like you can like research studies, and studies demonstrate that people tend to make black girls adult in their minds at a very young age. If you have a black girl and a white girl in the same classroom, both of whom may be at the same developmental level and both of whom are exhibiting the same behaviors, while the little white girl might be seen as just needing a little more assistance, the little black girl may be viewed as understanding very well what she's doing, as intentionally doing whatever, you know, as combative or disruptive or whatever like negative kind of connotations come along with that. And as a result, people are less likely to like intervene and help. That there are traffickers who specifically single out like black girls because they also understand that, and they also understand that like if they tell the black girls that, you know, nobody wants to help you, it's being reinforced by society anyway. I could give you a great example of that. So when I was trafficked, my trafficker would always tell us like his preference was for the minority woman, his preference was for black women. He did have some Latino women as well. When I was young, and that like mind space, I used to think that that meant something good. As I got older and I really began to like kind of destroy the hold that the coercion and the fraud and the like abuse had on me, then I started to like really dissect that, and I was like, no, hell no. What that was he knew that we wouldn't go missed. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like we would be like the girls that society forgot about or didn't care about going and extracting. Language is skewed as it concerns the black girl when she's being trafficked versus the white girl. As it concerns the black girl, is oh, what she's choosing to do, what she wants to do. For the black girl to criminalize the behavior, the same behavior of the victim that's a white girl, but the language is totally different. Her assailant, yeah, all of that, it changes, you know, very consciously, like very intentionally, the language is used differently. And more often we are criminalized for those behaviors because people believe us to like be responsible and to like know what is happening to us and to understand all of these like interconnected elements of oppressions and exploitations that like I didn't wrap my head around, and still I'm 33 and I'm still wrapping my head around this. And there's really no, it's an always like seeking to understand better, you know what I'm saying? So like for me then, I know that there's no way, my level of understanding was not where it is now. The criminalization of black girls who are subjected to exploitation is a very, very real thing. When you start to criminalize, you, first of all, you sever any connection that the common world has to the world of an exploited person, you know, and then you just provide the proof that the trafficker is looking for to the victim, that like, see, this is exactly what I told you. They don't care about you. You are disposable to them. And it's really a shame. I think it's one of the sadder sides of humanity to see the criminalization of the youth and the criminalization of the women of color as it concerns being exploited. So these are all like disparities. These are all things that are not equitable all the way around, and they do have an effect on the outcomes for people. Now that's not to say that like, certainly there are people who grew up, in more affluent areas who, have all these other kinds of considerations who also end up trafficked. So this is not to like minimize that in any way, but there are some very pronounced disparities as it concerns, especially as it concerns Black girls. Some states would recognize the trespass as, oh, that's eligible for vacature or that's eligible to be sealed or expunged off of someone's record because they trespassed because they were being exploited, while some states will only really recognize like actual like solicitation prostitution, but not what I like to call like residual implications or like the trespasses, or sometimes there might be theft involved, or those kind of charges that are all like charges that happened as a result might not like be held to that same like regard of like being eligible for vacature and things like that in different states. But I'm hopeful about it because I see that more and more the conversations are being had. More and more people are becoming aware of themselves and how they handle different people. It seems to me that even systems are beginning to kind of dissect themselves in terms of like, how are we dealing with this, and how are we dealing with this as it concerns different people, and what is culturally appropriate to do in these situations, and different things like that. Because of my experience being trafficked, as I was trying to like forge ahead and regain a sense of my own identity, I also had to contend with a lot of issues with systems and things of that nature in terms of like getting my life on the right track. So while I was trying to like propel myself forward, I had some underlying issues that were challenging me and were kind of like bogging me down. So I started reaching out for support from different community services and things like that so that I could try to see myself clear of some of these impediments. And through that, I started to identify like support people and some mentors. And so that was really my first experience with advocacy. And at that point, I still don't think I knew that I would become an advocate. And so my work has become much more about how do survivors help survivors just like maneuver through life, not telling anybody what's right and what's wrong so much, but how do I, as a woman who experienced being sex trafficked, help another person who has experienced being sex trafficked maneuver through life, making sure that in whatever that they do, that they are advocating for themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, my position on sex trafficking is that, for a person to be benefiting from another person's exploitation is not well with me. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a perfect person, and I don't think that there's a perfect person walking this earth. So what I think is best is for us to operate in a fashion where we're trying to help each other to achieve our maximum like best self, and to be focused on that, like helping a person learning how to advocate for what is best for them. What I could do is be a support to you in that. So if you're telling me, I'm experiencing something, I could say, okay, well, here's what I've done in that situation. Or I could say, well, here's the resources that I know that you could probably utilize to get that situation resolved, or something like that. I recognize that sex trafficking victims are all genders, having conversations, sharing experience, and the same way you would with like any of your friends or family,